Hello, everyone. Welcome to Other Voices Online. I'm your host, Paul George. Other Voices, of course, is brought to you by Peninsula Peace and Justice Center. I'm glad you could join us this evening. This is the second installment of a special series that we're doing called Joe Biden and ... And this time we're going to take a look at Joe Biden's expected policies when it comes to nuclear weapons, nuclear deterrence, abolition, disarmament, arms control, that whole thing. And to get you in the right mood, I found a nice little paragraph from a recent article just in the last couple of days from the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists to kind of set the pace of where we've been so that we know where we've been when we try to figure out where we're headed. So let me read this one paragraph by way of introduction. During his one term as president, Donald Trump single-handedly destroyed decades worth of hard work done by previous US administrations in establishing trust, confidence, and diplomacy on nuclear and non-nuclear issues among both friends and foes. In 4 years, he made the prospect of nuclear proliferation, a new nuclear arms race, and even the use of nuclear weapons more likely. His nuclear legacy will be tainted by a series of failures, including, but not limited to, eviscerating decades of trust building between the United States and Russia, withdrawing from the landmark multilateral deal to stop Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons, engaging in a series of handshakes and photo ops with dictators that resulted in naught, and a sheer disregard and contempt for diplomacy, science, expertise, and professionalism. End quote. Bulletin of Atomic Science is just a few days ago. To help us understand how we might overcome all this disaster of the Trump era, I'm really pleased to welcome back a frequent guest here on Other Voices, Jackie Cabasso, Executive Director of the Western States Legal Foundation, leading nuclear abolition organization in the Bay Area, and certainly it's Jackie and Western states are well known internationally as being leaders in the international movement to abolish nuclear weapons. Jackie Cabasso, welcome to Other Voices.
Thank you, Paul.
Welcome back to Other Voices.
Thanks. Great to be back.
Good to have you here. Yeah. Let me start this with this question. You and a very impressive list of international activists recently, back in November, a couple weeks after the election, delivered to the presidential transition team a message to the presidential transition team from the nuclear disarmament community entitled "Restoring U.S. Leadership to Eliminate Nuclear Threats." And we're going to talk about some things in here, but how did this letter come about? What kind of impact do you hope it have? I asked you before that, so I know you haven't heard a response yet. I imagine Joe and friends are kind of busy, but I think this is something you do routinely, is try to bring people together from all around the world to lobby lawmakers and political leadership on the issue of the abolition of nuclear weapons. Tell me a little bit about this letter.
Well, in this case, I think because of the conditions that developed under Trump, there has been over the last year or so a much greater willingness of groups that have traditionally been labeled as arms control versus disarmament, or being in the beltway or grassroots, to overcome some of those designations and work together. And so there was quite a bit of cooperation and collaboration in preparation for the 75th anniversaries of the US atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August. Coalition calling itself #StillHere, which really included a remarkable breadth of organizations working across that arms control disarmament spectrum. That was one of the developments. Earlier in the year, because the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty Review Conference was postponed, it was supposed to happen in April and May, and normally non-governmental organizations organize themselves to give short presentations to the government delegations, but working sort of with their own group or their own little cluster groups. This year we decided, because the conference was not happening, that we would coordinate a statement from civil society and get as many groups to sign on as possible. I was part of the drafting group for that one, along with Daryl Kimball from the Arms Control Association and some of the other people who signed on to this letter. So there's been this, I mean, this is one of the rays of light I see in this whole horrible situation, is that there's been much greater cooperation in the last year or so. So this was, I think, an outgrowth of that. I didn't actually draft this one, but I was invited to sign it. And while I probably don't agree with every, word, I thought it was pretty good and reflects really what needs to be said now.
And does this broad coalition have plans to follow up on this letter once the Biden administration has settled in?
Yes, I'm sure it does, because there are some people who've signed onto this who you can see actually have pretty close relations with the federal government. So there will be channels definitely to follow up on this. But something, if I could just go back to that thing you read at the beginning, because I really want to.
Sure.
It is absolutely everything that you read is true. And Trump took a wrecking ball to the international post-World War II order. He's done tremendous damage, including on prospects for arms control and disarmament, but it predates Trump. I mean, Trump actually inherited the keys to the castle, if you will, that enabled him to do these things. And I just want to read you a short couple of sentences from a speech that Joe Biden gave as he was leaving office. It was remarks by the Vice President on nuclear security. And he repeated a lot of the things that Obama had said in his Prague speech. But this is really essential. A nuclear deterrent has been the bedrock of our national defense since World War II. And so long as other countries possess nuclear weapons that could be used against us, we too must maintain a safe, secure, and effective nuclear arsenal to deter attacks against ourselves and our allies. That is why early in the administration, we increased funding to maintain our arsenal and modernize our nuclear infrastructure so that our arsenal remains safe and reliable, even with fewer weapons and even without tests. So, and this is a part of a deal that was made to get Senate ratification of the New START Treaty, which is loaded with conditions promising a massive increase in expenditure for nuclear weapons infrastructure, missile defenses, including the option, maintaining the option of weaponizing outer space. And Russia adopted reciprocal, the Russian Duma adopted reciprocal conditions. So the point is that Trump walked into office with the US already poised to spend $1.2 trillion over the next 3 decades.
1.2 trillion with
over the next 3 decades, and that has went up under Trump to 1.7 trillion at least. But the point is, this is, to me, this is the absolute crux of the matter. Bill Clinton did the same thing in trying to negotiate Senate ratification of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. He put in place, with the collusion with the National Nuclear Weapons Laboratories, the Stockpile Stewardship Plan, which was essentially putting together a massive program to functionally replace full-scale underground testing with laboratory experiments and supercomputer simulations, and a promise of another big payment in 10 years, which is what the Obama payment was. So if you don't know, you never know who's coming into office, right? And in this case, we get our worst case nightmare, and he he is inheriting this mega death machinery that allows him to, in his nuclear posture review, make, announce plans for new variants of weapons and so on and so forth. So I think, that's what we have to get at somehow. Now, I can say more about Biden. I think Biden has a long history of working on arms control. He is very knowledgeable about nuclear weapons. He's been involved in like all of the nuclear arms control negotiations since 1979. So,
Wow.
and he advocated during the Obama administration for making this, limiting the nuclear weapons to the sole use of retaliating against a nuclear attack. Now, that did not make it into the Obama nuclear posture review, but it did commit to creating the conditions that would make that possible. And so,
But still no promise of no first use.
he has indicated openness to that, but not a promise. Really? Yeah. But we have to also look at no first use rolls easily off the tongue, but what does it really mean? If it's just a pledge, it doesn't mean a whole lot, especially given the history of the behavior of this country with respect to treaties and agreements. If it's more than a pledge, then it requires a fundamental change in the force structure, which is a big deal, which would require a huge political commitment, nearly tantamount to deciding to negotiate the elimination of nuclear weapons. If that makes sense to you.
Yes, it does. It does, because a pledge, a legally binding pledge of no first use would be a tremendous step forward. I don't think any country has made such a pledge, have they?
Russia had a no first use policy until it reversed it in 1996 or something like that. And China also has a no first use policy. But we don't really know what that means unless it's tested. What Biden has expressed support for is taking nuclear weapons off of hair trigger alert. And that could be a piece of a meaningful no first use policy. Of course, no first use has its own problems because you certainly don't want to allow for secondary use. I mean, if nuclear weapons are used once, hey, game up, man. I surrender. I mean, there's no point in killing millions more people across the ocean,
Explain a little bit more for the audience what it means when Biden talks about supporting taking the nuclear weapons off hair trigger alert.
Well, the United States has, there are 3 delivery systems for its nuclear weapons. Intercontinental ballistic missiles. Those are stationary missiles. There are about 480 missiles, I believe, spread in silos in about 6 states throughout the Midwest. And those are able to launch, intercontinental ballistic missiles, but they're fixed in place. Then there's the submarines, which are patrolling the world's oceans, poised to target nuclear weapons just really on a few seconds notice. And they carry a lot of missiles. I can't give you the numbers off the top of my head. And then you've also got the strategic bombers, which are bombers that carry nuclear bombs. So right now, there are believed to be about 1,500 to 1,800 US and Russian nuclear weapons that are on high alert, launch on warning. That means if there's a suspected attack or something happens, then they launch. They don't wait to necessarily find out or be struck first. And there have been a number of cases where there have been close calls where a Norwegian rocket launch was mistaken by the US as a Russian missile launch. There was another time when it was a flock of geese. There was another time, I guess it was the Russians thinking that a flock of birds was a US incoming missile and came very close to launching. So that's kind of the standard state of play. And so taking nuclear weapons off high alert, again, that means, it doesn't mean a whole lot in and of itself unless the details are specified. Does that mean removing the warheads from the delivery systems and keeping them many miles apart? Does it mean just a stated declaratory policy? You know, those kind of things should be meaningful, and also confidence or trust building measures with the other nuclear armed states. Inspections, verification, you know, what does it mean? And there's not enough discussion, I think, about those kinds of points.
There hasn't been a lot of discussion about nuclear weapons and their use and their existence for far too long, I think.
No, that's for
politically sure. and socially as a society. Let's talk about some of the specific situations that Joe Biden will be facing when he comes in. Right. And first and foremost is the New START Treaty, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which is the sole remaining nuclear weapons arms control treaty with Russia. It's due to expire 16 days after Joe Biden takes office. What are you and the movement looking at?
Well, there's been a lot of focus on that now for the last, well, since Trump withdrew the United States from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty last year, or in 2020, in 2019, sorry. It's just the new year, but that still feels like 2020.
That's right. Far from putting the wrong date on the checks, saying last year, I find is the biggest problem with the change in the calendar. But please go ahead.
Right. Anyway, Biden was very involved in negotiating this treaty, and this treaty was more of a confidence build, in my opinion, was more of a confidence building measure than it didn't reduce the number of nuclear weapons at all, and it only covered what are called strategic nuclear weapons, which are, it's a somewhat arbitrary designation, but which are long-range nuclear weapons, not tactical or short-range nuclear weapons, which Russia has more of than the United States. But it does include provisions for inspections and verification and regular talks. And it was, I think, hoped by some of us that when it was ratified, it would lead to a better environment for further negotiations between the US and Russia. And Unfortunately, that is not the case. The United States, Trump pulled out of this other treaty, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which banned an entire class of nuclear weapons, claiming that Russia was violating the treaty. Russia claims the United States was violating the treaty, so that's been another source of contention. So I think most of us in this field believe that it's really important to get this treaty extended, to buy some time for trying to repair relations and restore some kind of diplomacy between the US and Russia, which is not going to be easy to do for various reasons. Now, as I mentioned, though, this treaty comes with a baked-in serious flaw, which is the conditions that were attached to the Senate ratification. And so another trick will be to keep the Senate out of this. If there's a new treaty or some kind of protocols or something, because again, the conditions. I have a remarkable quote here. Listen to this. No, sorry, this is in my other phone. the conditions that were attached to the Senate ratification made it functionally an anti-disarmament treaty. There's a quote here from, yeah, there we go. So in November 2010, the Obama White House issued a fact sheet entitled "An Enduring Commitment to the U.S. Nuclear Deterrent," which announced the Obama administration's plans, quote, to invest more than $85 billion over the next decade to modernize the U.S. nuclear weapons complex that supports our deterrent. And remember what deterrence means. It's threatened use of nuclear weapons, a credible threatened use. This level of funding is unprecedented since the end of the Cold War, and it also didn't include an additional $100 billion by 2020 to modernize missiles and delivery systems. So this was one of the political conditions that led to Senate ratification. This was stated in so many words by Senator Bob Corker. You may remember him. He now seems like a moderate Republican, Republican senator from Tennessee, who said, I am, quote, "I am proud that as a result of ratification, we have been successful in securing commitments from the administration on modernization of our nuclear arsenal and support of our missile defense programs. Two things that would not have happened otherwise. In fact, thanks to the contributions my staff and I have been able to make, the New START Treaty could easily be called the Nuclear Modernization and Missile Defense Act of 2010.
Wow.
And so that puts us in a very strange place, because now we're desperate to try to save this treaty because it's the last one standing. But these are the kind of, I mean, I'm going to keep pointing out these conundrums because that's what I do. You know, but this is the kind of thing that we have not grappled with. We have not come to terms with. When my group raised questions about these conditions before the Senate ratified it, we were actually, you know, told by other groups, don't talk about that. Don't say that. We're not going to distribute your material because you're going to jinx it. You're going to undermine it. The same thing happened with the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty ratification, which didn't happen, even though the deal was made and they got the deal for the modernization. So, you know, we have to think differently. We have to think in a more nuanced way. These things are complicated, and if we keep repeating the same ways of doing things, we're not going to get anywhere. And that's one of my concerns about Biden. While on the one hand, like I said, he has a long history, he knows something, and his instincts, at least for reducing dangers, seem to be pretty good. He also knows a certain way of doing things that has been done over and over again, resulting in where we are now.
Yes. So I understand that the treaty can be simply extended by mutual agreement for up to 5 years. And I assume if it's extended, it doesn't need to go back to the Senate for re-ratification and all this spending on modernizing our nuclear weapons will stay in place. It won't give you a chance to lobby to, you know, get rid of that stuff. But if they negotiate something new, that would have to go back to the Senate for ratification.
It might. Now, the Obama administration got pretty good at avoiding taking things to the Senate. And that's why you have the Paris Climate Accord, which is not a treaty, really. The Senate didn't ratify it. And in fact, I only learned this recently. John Kerry, who's now will be the new head of climate change, I forget the title, actually was instrumental in negotiating the Paris Climate Accord and took it and was instrumental in changing the word shall to should in terms of the states parties actually meeting the stated climate goals. So, and then also the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran Agreement, which Biden also worked on, was not submitted to the Senate because it was believed that the Senate would not ratify it. And so it made it possible to reach the agreements, but it also made it easier for Trump to pull out.
So before I leave the topic of the New START treaty, I know Vladimir Putin had expressed some interest in simply extending it. What happens if this doesn't get extended? And the treaty, what does it mean to have no arms reduction treaty with Russia? Arms control treaty?
Well, it means that there's no limits on the number of deployed strategic nuclear weapons that each side can have. It means there's no.
So they could start increasing immediately.
It means there's
from
no.
The 1,500.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It means that there's no ongoing sort of, country to country or institution to institution verification going on. There might be no formal talks of any kind going on. The treaty at least is a framework for hosting discussions about verification and compliance and those kinds of things, again, which can be important for building confidence and building trust. So
again,
we'd be starting from
officially,
I'm sorry, if it's gone, then we're starting from scratch with a very difficult relationship with Russia going in, and also a very difficult relationship with China going in. China's not part of this, but this was one of the things that Trump wanted to do, was to bring China into these negotiations, which is nonsensical, because China's arsenal is about 300 nuclear weapons, whereas the U.S. and Russia are about 14,000. So, and they're not a party to the first treaty. So, I mean, the best case, I'll give you the best case scenario. It's all gone, and there are no more bilateral negotiations. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is stuck or dead. Then something new, may have to start. But that's not a case I would like to put odds on.
Okay, let's turn our attention. You just made brief reference to the Iran nuclear agreement. Again, that was not a treaty, but it was a multi-powers agreement. European countries, Russia, the United States, all signed on to this. Joe Biden has indicated his desire to return to the treaty after Trump pulled out. What is your reading on the possibility of that actually happening? Iran agreeing to it, the political will in Washington to actually re-enter this agreement with Iran? What does your ear to the ground tell you about all this?
It's very tough. Again, it's very complicated because, first of all, the deal was not about anything other than putting constraints on Iran's nuclear program, civilian nuclear program, so that it would not be possible for them to develop nuclear weapons. Although in connection with these negotiations, there was no evidence that they were pursuing a nuclear weapons program. Trump claimed he wanted to throw it out because it wasn't broad enough. It didn't cover human rights. It didn't cover terrorism, blah, blah, blah. And Iran actually remained in compliance for a long time before it started. I'm sorry?
Surprisingly, they did.
It is surprising. Well, I think that the leadership in Iran currently, Rouhani, actually has a very good reputation among Iranian American activists as somebody who really wants to change things there. He's in trouble with his right wing now, and there's an election coming up there. So in order to, although Iran has sent mixed signals about whether it will or will not entertain rejoining this agreement or negotiating a new one, the US is going to have to do something to regain some semblance of trust as a negotiating partner, and probably would need to lift sanctions on Iran. And right now, I mean, right up to the end of the Trump administration, you've got the US in the Persian Gulf with an aircraft carrier and other kinds of warning and threatening signals to Iran. And we don't know where that's going to go in the last few days of Trump's presidency. So it's a tough situation. I mean, one of the things I liked that Biden said in that speech that I quoted is that with what he's learned as a negotiator is that you don't negotiate treaties because you trust each other with adversaries. You negotiate treaties because you don't trust each other. So, I mean, he at least understands like basic diplomacy. And, you know, so, but I mean, it's very important. It's very important that everything be done to try to revive that, because in the exact opposite way that Trump treated it, that agreement, which is very, very important to remember also, you said this, I want to say it again. It was the P5, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, all nuclear armed states, China, Russia, UK, France, United States, Germany, the European Union, and a United Nations Security Council resolution, all supporting it. So it wasn't a bilateral agreement that the US could just walk out of and expect nothing to change. I mean, the US, we like to say that, not that he walked out, but that the US violated the agreement. So, but it's so important to that part of the world, to any kind of prospects for ever normalizing relationships between Iran and the United States. And what I was going to say was, it should have served as the basis for further broader negotiations on other issues of contention. It was like the perfect confidence building measure.
I think that's an excellent point. It should have been seen as step one, and additional negotiations on missiles and human rights, all that could have followed on. Mm-hmm. They got a good solid nuclear agreement. Before I move on, I do want to ask, do you think Biden will move very quickly on re-entering this agreement with Iran? Or is it something that just might get backburnered because of the tricky political situation in Washington?
It's very hard to know that, but I think that he's going to have to move fast because of the Iranian domestic elections coming up later in the year. Because if the hardliners come back in, there's no chance.
That's right. That's a good point. I think Iran's elections are May. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah.
I think it's May. I do want to get to our audience and get them involved here, but I do want to ask you about one very positive thing. Mm-hmm. On February 22nd, next Friday, a new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons will come into effect. This comes out of the United Nations. Can you talk a minute, tell people
Yes.
what this is and,
sure.
and how important it is or not important?
Well, once again, I'm going to give you one of my conundrum answers. So I was present for the negotiations in 2017 of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And in fact, it was adopted by, I think, 120 countries. And what it does is it bans the possession, threat, use, deployment, and production of nuclear weapons. But all of the nuclear armed states, the United States, the eight other nuclear armed states, boycotted the negotiations, along with Japan, Australia, North Korea, and all but 28 of the NATO member states. These are all countries under the US nuclear umbrella, meaning that the US has agreements to protect them with nuclear weapons. And following the vote, the US, France, and the United Kingdom declared, quote, "We do not intend to sign, ratify, or ever become a party to the treaty." And then in October 2016, Obama's UN ambassador condemned the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in the General Assembly, saying, quote, "Advocates of a ban treaty say it is open to all, but how can a state that relies on nuclear weapons for its security possibly join a negotiation meant to stigmatize and eliminate them?" So there you have deterrence again, the heart of the Gordian knot. So I think the treaty represents the total repudiation of nuclear weapons by most of the countries that don't have them. I will note that those countries are already banned from having nuclear weapons under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and most of them are also in nuclear weapon free zone treaties. So what does it mean? People are people around the world are extremely excited about it. And in some countries, it really presents an opening for serious strategic campaigning. The NATO countries where US nuclear weapons are deployed, for example, where, like Germany, where they have strong public opinion, including in parliament, for this treaty. There's at least one theory that if you can get one of the NATO countries to join the ban treaty, then that puts tremendous pressure on the United States. Or in Japan, similarly, which of course is no brainer to think that the Japanese movements are really campaigning against it. Here, I think we are facing, and we've only touched on some of these things, we are facing grave threats regarding nuclear weapons of our own, and of conflicts, increasing conflicts with other nuclear armed states in an eroding arms control environment. So here, I think that it's most important to use it as a talking point, as a way to educate, the American people, hey, and members of Congress, did you know that there's a treaty that prohibits the states parties from developing, testing, producing, manufacturing, acquiring, deploying, or using, or threatening to use nuclear weapons, and also to prevent them from assisting or encouraging such acts. So there's a lot that can be done with it in those countries, but I want to come back to that in a minute. But the United States has been so strongly opposed to it that just before it entered into force, it required 50 ratifications for it to enter into force. The United States actually, the Trump administration actually sent diplomatic demarches to many of the countries that had ratified it or were about to ratify it, urging them not to, or to withdraw from it, which is incredible.
Wow.
So it clearly poses some threat someplace in the system. It also, something else it does, it's two things that are very important, and these are things that I personally worked on getting into the treaty, is that it makes the threat of use a prohibited act. And that's deterrence. That's a very important part of the talking points. And it recognizes existing international law obligating all states not to test, use, or threaten to use nuclear weapons. So the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the first resolution of the United Nations back in 1946, the International Court of Justice Advisory Opinion, and so on. So all that is good. And it also recognizes the humanitarian impacts on nuclear testing victims and calls on all state parties to provide financial assistance to those countries if it is those victims, if it is so able. Now, tomorrow, the Abolition 2000 Global Network to Eliminate Nuclear Weapons is going to be releasing a statement on the ban treaty. And this is what I'm just going to read you this one paragraph, because this shows how it could be used, I think, effectively to put pressure on the nuclear armed states. We encourage all ratifying states to develop and pass comprehensive implementing legislation that includes prohibitions on the transit and financing of nuclear weapons. Prohibiting transit would place additional restrictions on the current deployment of nuclear weapons. And if all of these countries and all the companies and institutions that operate within them were to end investments in the nuclear weapons industry, it would make an even more significant impact on the nuclear arms race. And we encourage the ratifying states to establish ministerial positions, cabinet level positions, and public advocacy committees and disarmament education funds to facilitate public education and effective policy to further advance the objective of a nuclear weapons free world. Now, I personally, do not think it's particularly effective to be calling on the United States government to sign and ratify the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty at this time, because that's tantamount to calling on them to unilaterally disarm, which just doesn't seem like a particularly serious demand at the moment.
Right.
So I think what we need to be doing in the United States is using it, as I said, for education, and coupling that with these other demands that we talked about in terms of reducing nuclear risks and dangers, cutting funding for nuclear weapons. And in that respect, there is some interest in Congress now, and there's a new defense budget cutting caucus, which is being led by Barbara Lee and Mark Pocan, among others. And the language we used here, I think, is pretty good. It is well known that the United States is not ready to support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, but we encourage the new administration to recognize that the TPNW is a good faith effort by the majority of states to eliminate the nuclear danger and build up the legal framework for the elimination of nuclear weapons, which, as I said, the US and the other nuclear armed states are already obligated to do under existing the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in particular, but also prohibitions on planning and preparing for genocide, targeting civilian populations, and other things.
So I do want to get our audience in here. I have one announcement to make, but maybe what we can do is start bringing some people on. If you have a question or comment that you want to make, we actually bring you on and make you a panelist on here and bring you on camera. So find the raise your hand button for those of you who are looking at home. And when we see that your hand is up, we have a helper behind the scenes who will bring you on as a panelist. What you'll see is Zoom disappear very quickly and come back on. You will be asked to start your video again and your audio, your microphone. So be sure you have to be sure you click on starting your video and your microphone when you come back on. And I'll try to keep tabs here. I see we have one person, Ellen Thomas. So TD, if you can bring Ellen on. I do want to make an announcement about the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that we were just talking about with our guest, Jackie Cabasso. Women's International League for Peace and Freedom next Friday, January 22nd, the day this enters into force. We'll be holding a vigil to celebrate the fact. They'll be out at El Camino and Embarcadero in Palo Alto from noon to 1:30. Again, that's Friday, January 22nd, noon to 1:30. El Camino and Embarcadero in Palo Alto. Bring signs and banners and celebrate the fact that the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons goes into effect officially on that same day. And then use that to lobby your legislators, as Jackie's just been reminding us in terms of education and outreach to continue this effort. So I see we have Ellen Thomas on. Ellen, welcome. Thank you. What's your question or comment?
Thank you. It's really good to see Jackie. We've been colleagues for a long time. And I just wanted to let her and you know that Eleanor Holmes Norton is planning to reintroduce her Nuclear Weapons Abolition and Economic and Energy Conversion Act again. You can read about it at prop1.org. That's prop1.org. Last session, it was HR 2419. You can Google that and find the text and see the 8 co-sponsors that came on last session. It's a long haul. She's introduced it every session since 1994, after we brought a voter initiative in Washington, D.C. that was successful. And it has evolved. And the version of it now is that the United States will sign and ratify the TPNW or a similar treaty if everybody else does. And so Jackie was talking about how it's sort of illogical to expect the United States to unilaterally disarm, and I agree with that. And Norton's bill addresses that. And it also earmarks the $1.7 trillion that's currently earmarked for nuclear modernization for transforming the war economy to a peace economy, and more specifically to a carbon-free, nuclear-free energy economy. So Ms. Norton has always in the past introduced it, and then we've sought co-sponsors afterwards. This time she is welcoming co-sponsors before she introduces it so that there are more names on it when it gets introduced. So I'm asking people to do that, to ask your representative to co-sponsor her bill and call her office and say that you will. And if you'd like to know.
How should people refer to it when they contact their congressional office?
Eleanor Holmes Norton's Nuclear Weapons Abolition and Conversion Act, I suppose, would be a good way to do it. But the title of it is Nuclear Weapons Abolition and Economic and Energy Conversion Act. It's a long title, but it tells you what it does. And it's not very long bill in it, actually. So check it out, HR 2419, prop1.org.
And you have, and you deserve a lot of, I want to acknowledge you for all the many years that you've made that happen and stuck with it.
Thank
So
you.
I hope we can get some of those 140 Republicans who voted against the election results to change their point of view.
It'd be nice to get more of the Democrats too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I can tell you from Peninsula Peace and Justice Center's angle, we will put out an alert and ask people to contact our local Congress people, including Anna Eshoo and Ro Khanna and Jackie's Spear. So that's great. Any other comments on this, Jackie?
No, I just think, I think we have this obviously horribly divided Congress. I mean, that's a problem. But I think that the pandemic has kind of, well, before we even had the white supremacist uprising, has really revealed how flawed our priorities are as a society and our including our tax dollars. And so I think that there may be, hopefully, and certainly among some of the new Democrats coming in and the old progressives, there should be a lot more receptivity to the fundamental idea of redefining national security in ways that make sense and that protect the population and not endanger it.
Absolutely. Well, Ellen, thank you very much for adding that information into us, and much appreciated. We've got another member of our audience on here, Cheryl Spencer. Cheryl, welcome back. What's your question or comment?
Good evening, Jackie. Good to see you.
Good evening.
So, Wilf in general has done a lot of education of ourselves about the TPNW, and we have relied quite a lot on Tim and Wallace of Nuclear Ban US, who has been looking into the articles and how they might be applied. A ratified treaty demands then that domestic laws be created and brought into being in the countries that have ratified a treaty. And so we are hoping that countries will have some domestic laws that would actually target the nuclear weapons companies, such as Boeing or Honeywell, and make it illegal because they are assisting. There's an assistance clause in the treaty that you can't assist anybody else to have anything to do with nuclear weapons.
Right.
So we're hoping that, Honeywell has over 100 facilities throughout the world where they're not making nuclear weapons there. They're making air conditioning and medical equipment and stuff. But that if they're doing that in Ireland already has passed some domestic laws that make, because they ratified the treaty, that make it illegal to be assistive of a nuclear weapons company. So we're hoping that, Honeywell may feel, well, maybe they shouldn't, they may be in trouble in Ireland, and so this is a strategy, rather than trying to get Biden to agree to it, you come at it a different way. You come at it through the companies who are making so much money from making nuclear weapons, and you're essentially trying to stigmatize nuclear weapons. We've managed to stigmatize landmines. The US never signed the landmine treaty, but nobody makes landmines anymore, I believe, because it's a weapon of, well, it's not mass destruction, but it's enough weapon of destruction. So there are other ways that this treaty that comes into effect on the 22nd will be used.
Yeah.
And through domestic laws and things like that. So
right. And I
think
I was referring to that. That's the thrust of this letter that Abolition 2000 is releasing tomorrow. So yes, I think that's right. But I think people in those countries are going to have to pressure their governments to actually take those next steps, to make sure they really implement it. And I do think that's, that's where the potential is.
And plus the other issue, the other way is to get divestment in these companies. That
right. I know. What I was going to say though is I think it's a mistake to conflate or to compare the landmines ban with the nuclear weapons ban. Landmines are horrible, inhumane, indiscriminate weapons, but they were never central to the national security of the global superpowers. So it's not really a directly comparable thing in my mind.
So trying to anyway, pension plans have a lot of money sunk in Boeing and Honeywell. Yeah. And we've got to get our local pension plans from organizations like universities to divest from those companies.
Absolutely.
That will help too.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Cheryl. Very good comment and addition to our discussion here. We're almost out of time. Let me just remind you before we leave the topic of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons behind. Once again, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom and a number of other peace organizations in the area will be gathering next Friday, January 22nd, from noon to 1:30 p.m. at El Camino and Embarcadero in Palo Alto to bring attention to this treaty coming into force on the 22nd, and to start a campaign of some of the things that Jackie has just been talking about. Jackie, I'll leave this up to you to leave us with some closing thoughts about the abolition movement, where you're going to be concentrating your efforts in the year ahead.
Well, that is, yeah. First, I just want to say that, I acknowledge that there are groups all over the world that are celebrating the entry into force of the ban treaty. I was just on a call previous to this interview with about 75 people around the US sharing all their plans for hanging banners and delivering copies of the treaty to heads of corporations and so on and so forth. There's a lot of enthusiasm generated by it. I hope that can be channeled into some of these other efforts to try to get, international diplomacy back on track, to try to reduce immediate nuclear dangers, to try to cut nuclear weapons spending, and to try to get the United States to stop thinking about Russia and China as near peer competitors, but to think of them as members of the same global community facing the same global threats. And my hope is, and I don't know whether there's any reason to believe this is true, but my hope is that the events of recent weeks, including the pandemic and the fact that it's worse than ever, and the vaccine rollout problems and all of that, the continuing economic crisis, and now this apparent serious threat from organized white supremacists is going to cause the new administration to kind of rethink its priorities. And again, like I said, rethink what it means to ensure public safety and national security. And that does not involve nuclear weapons for sure. So that's where I hope things are going. I do think that there are people in this administration who will be more receptive to what we have to say. There are certainly members of Congress who are. And we'll see, but there's a lot going on. So I just hope that people can sustain their enthusiasm about the ban treaty and channel it into ongoing serious efforts to change the course of this country.
Well, I think those are excellent closing thoughts, and rethinking our security is a good theme for the coming year as we go on with this work. Jackie Cabasso, Executive Director of Western States Legal Foundation, has been my guest. Jackie, thanks so much for joining me again here on Other Voices. And as I've been telling my other guests from previous Zoom experiences, I miss the TV studio because one of my favorite things was when we were off the air, walking out to the parking lot with my guests and chatting and stuff. That's not going to happen. We're just going to disappear.
Right.
So thank you very much for your comments. I want to thank everybody who attended today. We keep an eye out on your email. We do send out some fact sheets with some information to help you follow up. I'll be asking Jackie to share some links that she thinks you might be able to see. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with the next couple of installments of our Joe Biden series. We still have climate change and universal health care that we're going to take a look at in this first series. But we're taking next week off because I understand something is going on in Washington that might be attracting people's attention. Once again, Jackie Cabasso, thank you so much. Thank you all. You've been watching Other Voices Online, brought to you by Peninsula Peace and Justice Center. I'm your host, Paul George. Good night.